I think it's best to assume the worst when we see data like this. What's up, guys? Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be talking about, does Trenbolone cause Alzheimer's? One thing that I'm sure you're already aware of is the fact that Trenbolone makes people a little loopy. And if you've used it before, I'm sure you've had at least some degree of mental effects from it, whether it be positive or negative in your perspective. The fact is that's one of the most, volatile compounds on mental state, and some guys just can't even run it because it's so bad for them. It's like the relationship destroyer drug. So one thing though, and I've done a video on this before in a more general context, talking about Trenbolone abuse in bodybuilding and, why it seems like its use is just, way over the top nowadays, comparing the dosage used to cattle and comparing it to, the human approved dosages that were used back with Negma back in the day, several decades ago in a clinical setting. Lots of different, good tidbits or nuggets that you can get from that video in terms of facts about Trenbolone. But as far as Alzheimer's in general, obviously aggression and like volatility of your mood and, behavior is going to come with any androgen. This is where the whole, idea of roid rage comes. In reality, it's more so just like it exacerbates your personality, in my opinion. So, if you have really aggressive personality, increasing your androgen index is going to exacerbate that, obviously. So, but Trenbolone in particular makes guys go a little extra nuts in comparison to other anabolic androgenic steroids. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the animal models that had Trenbolone administered to them also experienced significant degraded cognitive outcomes. So one thing I did cover it in the last video, just all but briefly, is this abstract from, well, you can actually go see the whole study yourself. It's called Trenbolone, an anabolic androgenic steroid as well as an environmental hormone, contributes to neurodegeneration. In particular, this part is the most notable. Trenbolone accumulated in adult rat brain, especially in the hippocampus and in the fetus brain. It altered amyloid beta 42 accumulation. Trenbolone induced apoptosis of primary hippocampal neurons in vitro and resisted neuroprotective function of testosterone. So the male rats given Trenbolone injections had amyloid beta 42 accumulate in their brains. So what is that exactly? Alzheimer's disease is believed to be caused by the accumulation of the beta amyloid peptide. And while there has been no human trial to assess if this occurs in humans, and there probably is never going to be, I think it's best to assume the worst when we see data like this. And I don't think it's a coincidence that guys get that, very strange mental side effect from Tren that they just don't get with other compounds. And amyloid beta plaque, that's the kind of thing, that's the stuff that accumulates in your brain that you need to clean up during deep sleep. This is why so many neurodegenerative diseases have been linked to poor sleep quality as of late, is the fact that if you don't have a sufficient amount of brain cleaning essentially occurring because you're not getting into deep sleep properly, this is what they think is a primary cause of Alzheimer's and many other age-related degenerative mental outcomes. When you administer Tren, obviously this is not a human model, so I can't say for certain, but I mean, if you're using something that has been shown clinically to increase this literal compound in your brain that is proven to be a cause of Alzheimer's, and you physically need to sleep in order to clear your mind of it, or your brain, I should say, it's probably not a good compound to be abusing. And there's a lot of guys that are using this stuff in every single cycle when it just makes absolutely no sense. Besides the fact that there's other hormones that are just as good as building lean muscle mass, in my opinion, you are potentially fucking up your brain. And I have some friends who I've seen cruise on Tren for years. And I'm not gonna say they're like insane now, but there's definitely a screw loose that just wasn't loose before, and I would proceed with caution. There's data that suggests that because Trenbolone's very tissue selective, and it's, selective in its way better than testosterone in terms of tissue selectivity context and muscle building to androgenic activity. There's data that's looking at Trenbolone literally as like hormone replacement therapy alternatives. But at the same time, if there's this data that we can extrapolate from, even if it's an animal model, I think it's easy to put 2 and 2 together and see that these rats, their brains get super fucked up on Tren and they don't seem to on other compounds, and they have this amyloid beta plaque buildup. Humans, when they take Tren, have mental side effects that they don't seem to get with any other androgen. 2 and 2 goes together? I don't know, but it's like the literal point of sleeping is to clear your brain of this compound. And if you're taking something that's causing it to accumulate, that's not going to be a good outcome regardless of how you look at this compound. So I would just advise, greatly limiting its use and avoiding it entirely if you can. If you're a competitive bodybuilder and it's like an absolute must, then obviously that's your own choice in terms of when you think it's okay to deploy it and whatnot, but I would just advise to severely limit its use because I think the risk profile is extremely high, and there are other androgens that are formidable at, building lean muscle mass that don't seem to have this association with it. And just based on the fact that distinguishing it from other compounds in terms of its blatant mental effects, something's off with it. So I'd be careful about it. Okay, I just wanted to do a quick addition to this video. It's a clip I added and recorded after finishing the original because there was some data I came across that I found really interesting that I feel like is absolutely worth mentioning and couldn't be done in a separate video. So I wanted to tack it onto this one. Basically, I saw an interview with Rhonda Patrick did with Dr. Matthew Walker. If you don't know, Rhonda Patrick is, she's been on Joe Rogan a few times. She's one of the forefront, leading, I guess, social media influencers who's also, a high profile researcher in terms of longevity, staying healthy, anti-aging, all that kind of stuff. And she did this interview with a guy who's at the forefront of research on sleep and how it affects health and, longevity and disease outcomes and whatnot. And they were talking about Alzheimer's. And there's this part of the interview where he talks about how beta amyloid plaque builds up in the exact same spot of the brain where would be responsible for deep sleep. So this clip is about 10 minutes in terms of the amount of content that I need to elaborate on my point here, but I promise you this is critical information, not just for Trenbolone, but in general for your health. So give this a listen. Basically, he elaborates on the vicious circle deep sleep and beta amyloid plaque buildup have on mental degenerative outcomes, Alzheimer's disease, etc. And then once you watch it, I'm going to relate this back to how this directly has to do with Trenbolone use.
Of those electrical deep brain waves of deep sleep. And it seems as though they come from all over the brain, but the principal epicenter that generates your deep sleep sits right there in the middle part of the prefrontal cortex. It is exactly the same part of the brain that accumulates toxic beta amyloid protein. Then we'd done studies, and other people had done studies before us, that demonstrated as we age, our sleep gets worse. But not just any type of sleep, especially that deep quality of sleep that we know and we spoke about is critical for saving and learning and retaining new memories. So all of these jigsaw pieces started to get put together in my head, and I thought, we need to do some studies. Is it possible that the amount of amyloid that you have in the brain in this sleep-generating center, it should directly predict the deficit in the amount of deep sleep that you get? If it predicts the deficit in the amount of deep sleep, it should predict the deficit in your ability to hold on and retain new memories, which is a hallmark cognitive feature of Alzheimer's disease: difficulty learning, difficulty retaining. So we did the study, and that's exactly what we found. The more beta amyloid that builds up in this central frontal part of the brain, the less the deep sleep that you have. The less amyloid-related deep sleep that you had, the more forgetful you were the next day rather than the more that you remembered. So this was the first part of the Alzheimer's sleep equation, which is that Alzheimer's disease attacks the deep sleep generating regions, and you have a diminution of deep sleep, which in turn blunts your learning and memory abilities, and you become more forgetful. A far more important discovery was made by another group, far more important than the one we made, which was essentially the reverse direction, which was to say, rather than amyloid sort of decreasing sleep, could sleep actually decrease the amount of amyloid that you get? And this was a discovery that was made in rats back in 2009, I believe, was the first evidence that was published in Science. And this is a colleague, Dr. Nedergaarden, who is out on the East Coast at the University of Rochester. And she made two wonderful discoveries. The first was that we've known for a long time the body has a waste sewage system called the lymphatic system. But the brain doesn't have its own lymphatic system. The lymphatic system does not penetrate the brain. So where does all of the garbage, the metabolic garbage, go that your brain cells produce? Where's the sewage system for the brain? And she discovered it. It's actually made up of a set of cells called glial cells, which are these supporting brain cells. And so she called it the glymphatic system rather than the lymphatic system. So your brain does have a sewage system, this glymphatic system. And that's the discovery that she made. Remarkable. Then, and I'm not quite sure what motivated her to do this, she started to measure how efficient that glymphatic, that waste system was when the rats were awake and when the rats were asleep. And what she found was that it's during deep sleep that these brain cells actually shrink by almost 60% when we sleep. Blows my mind. Yeah. It's almost like, all of the buildings in New York all of a sudden shrink, and it leaves these much greater, larger areas for the cleaning crews to come in and clean up all of the metabolic detritus of the city's activity during the day. That's exactly what happens during sleep. And the cleaning solution is what we call cerebrospinal fluid. And through a pulsatile mechanism during sleep, you get a 10 to 20% increase in the bathing of cerebrospinal fluid through the brain, which washes away all of the metabolic byproducts that have been building up. One of those metabolic byproducts is beta amyloid. And in fact, if you deprive those rats of that deep sleep, you immediately get an increase in toxic beta amyloid. So now we've linked these two. I'm sorry, it's a long story, but if you're not getting enough deep sleep at night, you're not giving yourself the chance for the kind of good night and sleep clean process to remove the beta amyloid. So more beta amyloid builds up. Where does it build up? Tragically, in the very same regions of the brain that generate the deep sleep that you need to clear out the toxic amyloid. So you start getting less deep sleep, so you get more toxic protein, less deep sleep, less deep sleep. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's a non-linear exponential curve. If you look at how amyloid builds up in the brain, and if you look at the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease, it is a non-linear exponential curve. It fits exactly what the sleep-dependent model of amyloid clearance would predict if you're not getting sufficient sleep. That's the reason why now insufficient sleep seems to be one of the most significant lifestyle factors determining that. Now, you could say, by the way, those studies were in rats and you deprive them of sleep for one night. What about humans? Like, surely, well, the study is now being done. Great study done out of WashU by a team of scientists there, led by David Holtzman. And they took a group of humans, and they did this very clever method where they deprived them of deep sleep, but they didn't deprive them of sleep. And you think, it sounds paradoxical. I can play you these auditory tones. Now, this is not like the memory reactivation where you play a tone and then you leave the brain alone for a while. Here, I'm just going to keep playing tones to your brain, really sort of annoying tones. But I can play them at a level that doesn't wake you up, but it lifts you out of deep sleep and keeps you in shallow sleep. So what's delightful about this method is that I can selectively excise one type of sleep, deep sleep, but I don't wake you up, so there's no stress of awakening. You are asleep for the same amount of time, but the quality of sleep is decreased.
Can street noise do that?
We don't know. Although I will come back to that when we speak about, hopefully, sleep appetite regulation, sleep glucose regulation, and sleep in low socioeconomic cultures. And I think it's possible there's a link. I think there's other factors that link poor sleep in low SES socioeconomic backgrounds. Is noise pollution one of them? I actually think it is, untested as yet. But what they did with these human participants, they selectively removed deep sleep while keeping them asleep. So total sleep time was not changed. And then in the morning, they woke them up, they rolled them over, and they did a spinal cord puncture, a lumbar puncture, and they measured the cerebrospinal fluid that was percolating within the spinal cord, which also goes around the brain. And you can measure the amount of beta amyloid, which is a reflection of perhaps how much amyloid is there within the brain. After one night of essentially a loss of deep sleep, you saw an immediate rise in the amount of beta amyloid. So it is a causal manipulation that insufficient sleep in rodents and in humans will lead to a rise in beta amyloid.
I think it was like 25 to 30% increase.
It was?
It was, yeah, it's definitely.
So as you heard him say, basically the area of the brain that gets a buildup of beta amyloid plaque is the same area of the brain responsible for that sleep, the deep stage of sleep that you need to clean out the beta amyloid plaque from your brain and basically clean up all the gunk and all the stuff that's going to lead to mental degradation down the line. So the thing I found really interesting about this is the Trenbolone studies that show the beta amyloid plaque buildup. These are in rats, but what's one of the worst side effects of Tren that everybody notes when they use it? Terrible sleep. So what does that tell you? Like, I think it's pretty indicative of what is the likely mechanism going on here. I think Trenbolone and the beta amyloid plaque buildup are directly correlated, just like he outlined. So I am hypothesizing that Trenbolone use inhibits deep sleep severely, which in turn results in your inability to clean up beta amyloid plaque properly, which consequently increases the amount in the brain, which in turn results in mental degenerative outcomes. So is Trenbolone going to cause Alzheimer's? I don't know, maybe, but it seems pretty damn convincing based on this correlation here between what you've actually seen in human data. If you kill your deep sleep, which, you know, if you've ever used Tren, I'm sure you know how terrible it makes your sleep. So these guys using Tren year round or for every single cycle, think about what it does to your sleep quality. Are you ever actually getting deep sleep to clean up that beta amyloid plaque? And in turn, that's what leads to Alzheimer's. So I think there's a direct correlation, not just in a rat context, but in a human context as well. And a very interesting experiment would be if somebody uses an Oura ring, like I use this every single night to track my sleep metrics, as much like it's as accurate as you're going to get without literally going in and getting like a very intense like sleep study done with high quality, like, you know, medical grade equipment. This thing roughly tells you how much light sleep you're getting, REM sleep, deep sleep, resting heart rate variability, etc., sleep quality in general. And if you wear this thing, if you're an anabolic steroid user and you have a baseline level of your average amount of deep sleep, let's just say you hypothetically you get like, you know, 20% per night of deep sleep of your total sleep, and it's, you know, you're getting a decent amount at least, and then you introduce Tren and all of a sudden your metrics show that your deep sleep goes to shit. I think that would be more than convincing for me to make an assertion that Trenbolone will dramatically increase your chance of getting Alzheimer's. So that's my stance on it. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe. Check out my blog, moreplates.moredates.com. Check me out on Instagram. Follow me there at moreplates_moredates. Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. Check out the podcast. Link in video description below. Drop a 5-star rating if you don't mind. Helps out the algorithm. Drop a comment here too. Helps out the algorithm here a lot. Thank you for watching. Talk to you soon.